Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you actually happened to a woman who thought she'd lost everything, right before she gained something she never expected. A hooded stranger. Secret phone call. A maid who saw too much. And a billionaire who almost walked away from the only real thing in his life. Stay with me. This gets unbelievable because nothing in this story is what it looks like on the surface. Not the laughter. Not the secrecy. Not even the silence that followed. By the end, you'll understand why some truths take the longest road to reach the people who need to hear them. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today, and which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one of the most emotional, heartwarming, and twist-filled journeys we've shared here. A story about love, trust, and the danger of judging what we don't fully understand. It's the kind of story that will make you question your first instinct, and by the end, might just remind you why patience and faith in the people we love matter more than we think. Let's get into it. Nobody in Daniel Whitmore's world ever imagined he would fall for someone like Sarah Bennett. Daniel was 38 years old, the CEO of one of the largest real estate development firms on the East Coast, a man whose name appeared in business magazines more often than his own family photos. He had grown up believing love was a transaction, something people offered when they wanted access to his money, his name, or his influence. By the time he turned 35, he had stopped believing anyone could love him without an agenda. Then he met Sarah. She wasn't from his world. She had grown up in a small town outside Cleveland, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Sarah became a nurse not because it paid well, but because she loved taking care of people who had no one else to lean on. She met Daniel 2 years earlier, in the most unremarkable way possible. He had collapsed from exhaustion in a hospital lobby after 3 sleepless nights closing a deal, and she was the nurse who refused to let him leave until his blood pressure stabilized. "You don't know who I am," he had told her, half joking, half serious. "I don't care who you are," she said. "Right now, you're a patient who needs rest." That honesty, that refusal to be impressed by his money, was what pulled him in. Slowly, over months of quiet dinners and long phone calls, Daniel let his guard down for the first time in years. 18 months later, he proposed to her on the rooftop of the same hospital where they met, in front of no cameras, no press, just the 2 of them and the city lights below. Sarah said yes without hesitation. But lately something had shifted. In the weeks leading up to their wedding, Sarah had started disappearing during quiet moments of the day, stepping out onto balconies, into hallways, into parked cars, always with her phone pressed to her ear, always speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. And more than once, Daniel had caught her laughing softly into the phone, a laugh he hadn't heard directed at him in weeks. He told himself it was nothing. Wedding planning stress. Family calls. Work. But Rosa, the housekeeper who had worked for Daniel's family for over a decade, noticed something else entirely. Rosa was fiercely loyal to Daniel. She had watched him get hurt before, had seen women use him and disappear once they realized prenuptial agreements weren't negotiable. She had promised herself she would never let that happen to him again. One afternoon, as Sarah sat laughing quietly on the edge of the guest bed, phone pressed to her ear, wrapped in a silk robe with her wedding dress hanging just feet away, Rosa stood frozen in the doorway. She heard fragments of the conversation. Sarah's voice soft, affectionate, almost intimate. "You have no idea how much this means to me," Sarah whispered into the phone. "I can't wait for you to see it. Just a little longer, I promise." Rosa's stomach turned to ice. She didn't wait. She didn't ask questions. She walked straight to Daniel's study, her hands trembling, and told him what she'd seen and what she'd heard. Daniel didn't say a word when Rosa finished speaking. He simply stood by the window of his study, staring out at the manicured gardens below, his jaw tight, his mind spinning through 100 different versions of betrayal. He had built an empire by trusting his instincts in business. But when it came to matters of the heart, his instincts had failed him before, badly. "Are you sure about what you heard?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than Rosa expected. "I know what I heard, Mr. Whitmore," Rosa said, her eyes glistening with something between guilt and conviction. "I wouldn't come to you with this if I wasn't certain. I care about you too much to stay silent." Daniel nodded slowly. He thanked her, then asked her to leave him alone. For the next hour, he sat in that study replaying every strange moment of the past few weeks. Sarah stepping outside during dinner to get some air. Sarah quickly locking her phone screen whenever he walked into the room. Sarah's evasive answers whenever he asked who she'd been talking to for so long. He told himself he was overreacting. Sarah wasn't like the others. She had never once asked him for anything. Not jewelry, not money, not access to his world. If anything, she had spent the last 2 years trying to pull him away from his obsession with work, reminding him what it felt like to be a person instead of a business card. But doubt, once planted, grows roots faster than trust ever can. That evening, Daniel found Sarah in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner, completely unaware of the storm building inside him. She looked up and smiled, the same warm, unguarded smile that had disarmed him from the very beginning. "Hey, you're home early," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I was going to surprise you with something tonight." Daniel studied her face for a long moment. "Who have you been talking to, Sarah?" Her smile faltered just slightly. "What do you mean?" "The phone calls," he said, his voice steady but pointed. "The whispering. The laughing when I'm not around. Rosa told me what she heard today." Sarah's face went pale. For a moment she said nothing, and in that silence, Daniel felt his heart crack down the middle. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "Then tell me what it is," Daniel said. "Because right now, all I have is silence and secrets 3 weeks before our wedding." Sarah opened her mouth to explain, and then, unexpectedly, closed it again. Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "I can't tell you yet," she whispered. "Please, just trust me a little longer." Those words, instead of comforting him, felt like confirmation of everything he feared. What happened next changed everything. Daniel stepped back from her, his expression hardening into something Sarah had never seen before. Not anger, but a wounded, guarded coldness, the same look he wore in boardrooms when someone had betrayed his trust. "A little longer," he repeated. "Sarah, we get married in 3 weeks. If there's something going on, I deserve to know now." "There's nothing going on between me and anyone," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I swear to you, this isn't what it looks like." "Then why can't you just tell me?" Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the kitchen counter. She looked at him, torn between 2 promises, one to Daniel and one to someone else entirely, someone she had sworn to protect until the time was right. "Because if I tell you now," she said quietly, "it will ruin the surprise I've been planning for months. And because it's not my secret to share yet." To Daniel, those words sounded like an admission. He turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word, leaving Sarah standing alone, shaking, her dinner forgotten on the stove. That night, Daniel didn't sleep in their bedroom. He sat in his study long after midnight, staring at old photographs of the 2 of them, laughing at a rooftop dinner, dancing awkwardly at a friend's wedding, sitting quietly on a park bench during a rare afternoon off. He couldn't reconcile the woman in those photographs with the idea that she was hiding another man. Then, just after 1 a.m., his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Mr. Whitmore, we need to talk. It's about Sarah. Meet me tomorrow alone. It's important for both of you. Daniel's blood ran cold. He read the message 3 times, his mind racing toward the darkest possibilities. Was this the man Sarah had been secretly calling? Was he about to discover a betrayal deeper than he imagined? Or was this the beginning of something else entirely, something no one saw coming? He didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, following the address and the message, Daniel found himself standing outside a modest, dimly lit office on the edge of the city, the kind of place that smelled of old paper and quiet secrets. Inside, seated behind a desk cluttered with folders, was a man in his early 50s, his expression tired but sincere. "Mr. Whitmore," the man said, standing to shake his hand. "My name is Frank Alvarez. I'm a private investigator. Sarah hired me 4 months ago." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "To do what?" "Follow me. Dig up dirt before the wedding." Frank shook his head slowly, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "No, Mr. Whitmore. She hired me to find her father." Daniel stared at the folder, unable to speak for a moment. "Her father. Sarah told me her father died when she was a baby. She said her mother raised her alone." "That's what Sarah believed her whole life," Frank said gently. "But 6 months ago, right before you two got engaged, her mother, while battling cancer in her final weeks, told Sarah the truth. Her father hadn't died. He had left when Sarah was 2 years old, struggling with addiction, ashamed of the man he'd become. Sarah's mother lied to protect her from that pain, from growing up believing her father chose to abandon her." Daniel sank into the chair across from Frank's desk, his anger slowly giving way to confusion and something heavier, guilt. "Sarah spent the last several months secretly working with me," Frank continued, "trying to track him down. Not for money, not for revenge. She wanted to find him before your wedding, to see if there was any part of him left worth reconnecting with, or at least to find closure before she started a new chapter of her life as your wife." "The phone calls," Daniel whispered. "The whispering. The laughing. That was me, Mr. Whitmore," Frank said. 2 days ago we finally located him. He's alive. He's been sober for 6 years, living quietly in Ohio, working as a mechanic. When I called Sarah to tell her, she broke down in tears of relief. And yes, she laughed too, out of pure joy and disbelief, because after all these months of searching, she was terrified she'd never find him at all. Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of his own suspicion crashing over him like a wave. He thought of Sarah's trembling hands, her desperate plea for him to trust her a little longer, her tears when he accused her of hiding something shameful. She hadn't been hiding an affair. She had been carrying the fragile hope of reuniting with a father she never truly knew, hoping to bring him to their wedding as a surprise, so that for the first time in her life, someone from her father's side of the family could walk her part way down the aisle of the life she was building. "There's one more thing," Frank said, opening the folder to reveal a handwritten letter. Her father wrote this for her, in case she ever found him and wasn't ready to meet in person right away. "Sarah doesn't know I'm showing you this. She wanted to protect you from her own uncertainty about whether he'd even want to reconnect." Daniel read the letter in silence, his throat tightening with every line. A father's raw, unfiltered apology, written by a man who had spent years hating himself for the daughter he left behind. Daniel stood up abruptly. "I need to go home." By the time Daniel returned to the house, the sun had begun setting, casting long amber shadows across the driveway. He found Sarah sitting alone on the back porch, her eyes red and swollen, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the mild evening air. She looked up as he approached, bracing herself for another confrontation. "Daniel, I know," he said quietly, sitting down beside her. I know about Frank. I know about your father. I know everything. Sarah's face crumpled. You went behind my back. No, Daniel said gently. Frank contacted me. He thought I deserved to know the truth, because he could see how badly this misunderstanding was hurting both of us. He paused, guilt heavy in his voice. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I let my own fears turn your kindness into something ugly in my mind. I should have trusted you. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. I wanted to surprise you. I wanted this to be something beautiful. A moment where I finally had someone from my father's side there when I became your wife. I didn't want you to see me as broken, chasing after a man who abandoned us. You're not broken, Daniel said, taking her hands in his. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You spent months quietly carrying this pain, trying to heal an old wound before you even said your vows to me, and you never once let it affect how you loved me. That's not weakness, Sarah. That's grace. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of weeks of tension slowly dissolved into something softer. Relief, understanding, and a deeper respect for what the other had silently endured. There's something else, Daniel said carefully, reaching into his jacket pocket. Frank gave me this. He said your father wrote it for you, in case you weren't ready to meet him face to face yet. Sarah's hands trembled as she took the folded letter. She read it slowly, tears falling freely now, but this time they weren't tears of fear or confusion. They were tears of a decades-old wound finally beginning to close. He wants to meet me, she whispered. He said he's been waiting years for the courage to reach out, but he was too ashamed. Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Then we'll meet him together. Whenever you're ready. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to fully exhale, the secrecy and fear she had carried alone finally lifting from her shoulders. But as the two of them sat together on that porch, neither of them noticed Rosa watching quietly from the kitchen window. Her own heart heavy with the realization of what her hasty warning had almost cost the two people she cared about most. The following morning, Rosa found Daniel alone in his study, staring at Frank's folder still open on his desk. Mr. Whitmore, she said softly, standing in the doorway. I need to apologize. Daniel looked up. Rosa, you don't need to. Yes, I do, she interrupted gently. I've worked for your family for 11 years. I've watched people take advantage of your kindness before, and I promised myself I would protect you from that ever happening again. But yesterday I let my fear speak louder than my patience. I judged Sarah based on a few whispered words, without ever asking her directly what was happening. I almost destroyed something beautiful because I acted out of protection instead of trust. Daniel studied her for a long moment before responding. You weren't wrong to be cautious, Rosa. You've seen things I chose to ignore in the past. But you're right that we both jumped to conclusions instead of simply asking Sarah what was going on. That's a lesson for both of us. Rosa nodded, her eyes glistening. Is there anything I can do to make this right? Daniel thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. Actually, yes. Sarah's father is coming to town next week for a quiet reunion before the wedding. I want everything to feel warm, comfortable, like a real family moment, not some staged event for a man who's spent years carrying enough guilt already. I could use your help making the house feel like home for him. Rosa's face softened with relief. It would be my honor, Mr. Whitmore. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sarah was on the phone with Frank, finalizing details for her father's visit. Her hands still trembled slightly every time she thought about seeing him in person for the first time since she was 2 years old. But for the first time in months, the fear was mixed with something new, hope. He asked about you constantly, Frank told her. He wanted to know what kind of person you'd become. When I told him you were a nurse who spent your life taking care of strangers, he cried, Sarah. He said it was more than he ever hoped you'd become, considering he wasn't there to raise you. Sarah wiped away a tear, steadying her breath. Do you think he'll actually come? Do you think he's really ready? I think, Frank said carefully, that a man doesn't spend 6 years staying sober and quietly asking about the daughter he left behind unless he's desperately hoping for a second chance. Whether he takes it or not will be up to him. But I believe he'll show up, Sarah. I really do. That evening, as Sarah told Daniel everything, every detail of her months-long search, every fear she'd carried alone, every hope she was almost too afraid to admit, Daniel listened without interruption, holding her hand the entire time. When she finished, he kissed her forehead gently. Thank you for trusting me with this, even if it took a rocky detour to get here. The week leading up to Sarah's father's arrival passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Sarah threw herself into hospital shifts to keep her mind occupied, but even amid the controlled chaos of the ICU, thoughts of her father crept into quiet moments, folding linens, checking monitors, walking empty hallways at 3 a.m. What would he look like now? Would he recognize the little pictures her mother had once shown her? Faded photographs of a much younger man holding a newborn baby with cautious, uncertain hands. Daniel, meanwhile, quietly worked behind the scenes with Rosa to prepare the house, wanting everything to feel unforced and genuine rather than like a grand, overwhelming gesture. He knew this reunion wasn't about impressing anyone with wealth. It was about repairing something far more fragile than any business deal he'd ever closed. On the morning of the reunion, Sarah stood by the front window, watching the driveway with a knot tightening in her stomach. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting steadily on her lower back. Whatever happens today, he said quietly, you're not walking into this alone. At exactly 10 o'clock, a modest gray sedan pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out slowly, tall, weathered by years of hard living, his hair more gray than the photographs Sarah remembered, his hands visibly shaking as he closed the car door behind him. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. That's him. She walked outside slowly, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The man, Robert Bennett, stood frozen by his car, his eyes filling with tears the moment he saw her. Sarah, he said, his voice cracking. I don't even know where to begin. Maybe, Sarah said softly, her own voice trembling, you could start with hello. Robert let out a broken, emotional laugh, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Hello, Sarah. I've imagined this moment for years, and somehow I still wasn't ready for how it would feel. They stood in silence for a long moment before Sarah closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around her father for the first time she could ever remember. Robert broke down completely, sobbing into her shoulder, years of guilt and shame finally releasing in that single embrace. From the porch, Daniel watched quietly, his own eyes glistening, while Rosa stood beside him, dabbing at tears she hadn't expected to shed. I almost ruined this, Daniel murmured. If Frank hadn't reached out, if I hadn't gone to that office, I could have lost her over a misunderstanding I created in my own head. Rosa placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. But you didn't, Mr. Whitmore. You chose to seek the truth instead of assuming the worst. That's what matters. Over the following days, something remarkable happened inside the Whitmore household. A family, in the truest sense of the word, slowly began to form. Robert stayed in a guest room at Daniel's insistence, despite his initial hesitance to accept such generosity from a man he'd only just met. Every morning, Sarah and her father sat together on the back porch, sharing coffee and quiet conversation, slowly filling in 25 years of missing history. Robert told her about the years he'd spent working odd jobs across 3 states, too ashamed to reach out, convinced Sarah and her mother were better off without him. He told her about the moment he finally got sober, not out of triumph but out of desperation, after hitting a rock bottom so severe he nearly didn't survive it. He told her that every year on her birthday, he would sit alone and wonder what kind of person she'd become, never once daring to hope she might have grown into someone as remarkable as the woman standing before him now. Sarah, in turn, told him about her childhood, about her mother's quiet strength raising her alone, about choosing nursing because she wanted to give people the comfort and care she once wished someone had given her family. She told him about meeting Daniel, about the life she was building, about wanting, more than anything, for her father to be part of her wedding, even if it was just standing quietly in the background. "I don't deserve a place at your wedding," Robert said one morning, his voice heavy with guilt. "I wasn't there for any of the moments that mattered." Sarah reached for his hand. "You're here for this one. That has to count for something. It's not about erasing the past, Dad. It's about choosing to show up now, and continuing to show up one day at a time." Robert wept quietly, nodding, unable to find words strong enough to express what her forgiveness meant to him. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself growing closer to Robert as well, spending evenings talking with him about resilience, about second chances, about the quiet, unglamorous work of rebuilding a life from nothing. Despite their vastly different worlds, Daniel found himself deeply respecting the humility and honesty Robert carried, a stark contrast to the many wealthy, entitled people Daniel had spent his career surrounded by. "You built an empire," Robert told him one evening. "But watching you with my daughter, I can see you understand something most powerful men never learn, that real wealth is measured by the people who choose to stay in your life, not the ones you can buy." Daniel smiled, raising his glass slightly. "That's a lesson Sarah taught me, long before I ever met you." The night before the wedding, Sarah found herself standing alone in the garden behind the house, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of everything that had unfolded over the past several weeks. The fear, the secrecy, the confrontation, the reunion, and now, finally, the quiet peace of a family slowly healing. Rosa found her there, wrapped in a light shawl against the evening chill. "May I speak with you, Miss Bennet?" Rosa asked softly. Sarah nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "I owe you an apology," Rosa said. "I judged you unfairly. I let my protectiveness over Mr. Whitmore cloud my judgment, and I nearly cost you both something precious, all because I acted on assumption instead of asking you directly." Sarah reached over and gently squeezed Rosa's hand. "You were trying to protect someone you love, Rosa. I understand that more than you know. I spent months protecting a secret I was terrified to share, and in doing so, I nearly lost the trust of the man I love most. We both learned something difficult this month." Rosa smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You truly are good for him, Miss Bennet. I see it now, clearer than ever." The following afternoon, under a canopy of string lights and soft autumn sunlight, Sarah walked down a simple aisle surrounded by close friends and family. Robert, dressed in a modest but neatly pressed suit, stood waiting near the front, his hands trembling with emotion as Sarah approached. "I know I don't have the right to ask this," he whispered as she reached him, "but would you allow me the honor of walking you the rest of the way?" Sarah smiled through tears, looping her arm through his. "There's no one else I'd rather have beside me." Together, father and daughter walked the final steps toward Daniel, who stood waiting with tears openly streaming down his face, unashamed, surrounded by the family he never thought he'd have. As Robert placed Sarah's hand into Daniel's, he leaned in and whispered, "Take care of her the way I should have all those years ago." "I will," Daniel promised. "Every single day." Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Daniel sat on the same porch where everything had nearly fallen apart, watching Sarah and her father laugh together over a game of cards, the sound of their joy filling the house that had once been so heavy with suspicion and silence. Rosa moved quietly between them, refilling glasses of lemonade, a permanent, contented smile on her face. The same woman who had once nearly shattered their happiness now serving as one of its quiet, steady guardians. Reflecting on everything that had happened, Daniel realized the most valuable lesson of his entire life hadn't come from a boardroom, a merger, or a multimillion-dollar deal. It had come from nearly losing the woman he loved over a misunderstanding rooted in fear rather than truth. He had learned that secrecy isn't always betrayal. Sometimes it's someone quietly carrying pain, trying to protect the people they love from unnecessary hurt. He learned that assumptions, however well-intentioned, can nearly destroy the very things we're trying to protect. And most importantly, he learned that real love isn't about avoiding conflict or misunderstanding altogether. It's about choosing patience, communication, and grace, even when fear whispers otherwise. Sarah, for her part, learned that vulnerability, however frightening, is often the bridge between isolation and healing. Her willingness to finally open up about her father, despite her fear of judgment, hadn't just repaired a broken family. It had deepened her marriage in ways she never expected. And Robert, a man who had once believed himself unworthy of forgiveness, discovered that redemption isn't a single moment. It's a daily choice to keep showing up, imperfectly but persistently, for the people who matter most. As the sun set behind the garden that evening, casting warm golden light across 3 generations finally united, Daniel turned to Sarah and smiled. "No more secrets," he said softly. Sarah laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "No more secrets. Just surprises worth waiting for." If this story touched your heart today, take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps this story reach more people who need a little hope today. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel because we share stories just like this one every single week. Stories about love, forgiveness, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild what fear almost tore apart. And if someone in your life needs a reminder that trust, patience, and honest conversation can heal even the deepest wounds, share this story with them today. Thank you for watching until the very end. Until next time, take care of the people you love, and never be afraid to ask before you assume. See you in the next story.